Unmute. We are live, I think. Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hello. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining. My name's Adam Cook. This is PowerShell Southampton, a user group in the south of the UK, but of course doing things virtually at the moment. And with us, we have Guy Leech. So he's going to be giving us a talk on, well, I won't spoil it, but it's writing robust PowerShell code. We think 2 hours on the schedule, is that right, Guy? But you mentioned maybe a little bit shorter.
We'll see. I kind of make it up as I go along. So every time I give this, it's a little bit different depending on questions asked and what's on my mind at the time.
Sure, no worries. Okay, well, if anybody needs to drop off, naturally you can catch the recording on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. If you haven't noticed already, on the right-hand side of the video, there's the chat functionality. Get engaged in the chat. If you have any questions, do ask them there. Guy and I will be engaging. I'll be feeding the questions to Guy, and naturally he'll answer them when he does. And then lastly, the quality setting. So if you hover your cursor over the video here, you have an opportunity to specify the quality settings. So you can, I highly recommend, so you hover the cursor, you go to the settings cog, and then you choose quality from the menu. I highly recommend you set it to 1080p so that when Guy goes to sharing his screen, it will be at the best possible resolution. Yeah. One more thing, thanks everyone to the PowerShell community. Everyone in the PowerShell community, I wouldn't have been able to stream the way I am now, rather weirdly through Azure and then back out, if it wasn't for everyone. So thank you. And that's pretty much it. So Guy, let me hand over to you. Do you want to give a quick introduction and whatnot, and I'll change scene to you and your screen now.
Okay, yeah, I certainly will. Now you know what I look like, and my lockdown hair is not as bad as it was last time, but still time. I'll turn my camera off, supposedly to save a bit of bandwidth, but also so I can do things without you seeing. Okay, so let me just put up a who am I slide. In fact, if you didn't know already, you can do this in a Windows CMD or PowerShell prompt, a who am I /user, to give you a SID. Not that you need to know my SID. And that's actually, I don't remember SIDs. It's one of the few things I don't remember. But I thought it'd be useful to put this in here, sort of give some background to my talk. So I am actually, yes, quite old. I know I sound very young, but I wrote my first code back in 1980, age 13, on a Commodore PET, a sort of business computer, my late COBOL programming phone.
Guy, have you accidentally put yourself on mute? Sorry, everyone. Something's happened to Guy. Don't know where. Don't know what. We'll give him a couple of minutes, see if he rejoins. Maybe it's a blip in connection or something. All right, transitioned live, take 2. Sorry, folks. What happened, Guy?
Yeah, I think my my broadband connection has decided to die on me, but fortunately, not do I just write robust code, but I have a robust internet policy. So I have a 4G router which I'd powered up beforehand. So when the broadband wasn't coming back, I've now switched over to 4G. So hopefully that will stay up. Apologies. Okay, so why write? Yeah, these things happen, but nobody died. Okay, so why write robust code? Well, yeah, again, let's come back. People will then start to trust you, say, okay, I've got a script for that. Yeah, but last time you gave me a script, it fell over in a quivering heap of redness. And if you get it right, so you test it once you've written it, then there should be fewer things to put right, because you can get everything in the script that might have forgotten to follow. Yeah, computers don't get it wrong. Well, unless you coding them get it wrong, of course. High successful outcomes. We all want everything
to share out your screen again.
Okay. Yes, I'm not very technical. Please do excuse me. I thought it would carry on from where I'm left off. Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out now and not in 2 hours' time. That would have been a little bit embarrassing. Okay, can we see that again now?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, that's me not getting invited back. But anyway, so we have our high success rate. And why not? That's what I would say to people. Because I'll see scripts and people which don't do much error checking. We'll come on to that later. And they'll say, well, I was going to add that later. But why add it later? Just do it as you code, yeah? It's much easier to write an if around something and say, well, if this works, then great. If not, well, let me see if I can fix it or output a meaningful error or something like that. But we'll talk about that later. So do it as you go. Nobody really wants to come back to code and go, well, now I've got the proof of concept working. Let me actually make this code legal, decent, honest, and truthful. But to a script that you knocked up quickly, adding the PowerShell to it. I always dread that bit. And some people say, well, write that first. And it's something I've toyed with. So just write it as you go along. Make sure it's second nature. You don't need to add it afterwards. Get yourself a good reputation. Obviously, there are bad reputations as well. So get a reputation as somebody who actually produces stuff that works. Yeah, and so I don't know where I got this from. I don't think I made it. Somebody must have said it before me or written it. But yeah, write it once, write it right. Yeah, as in, are you really going to produce code without bugs? Well, occasionally I write code that works first time. And don't get put off if you don't, because what we'll probably see during these demonstrations I'm going to do as well. So it's not just me talking for 2 hours, don't panic, or talking on mute or with no broadband connection, but we'll do quite a lot of demos. And the idea really here is that I will make mistakes. Yeah, even the best people. I'm not saying I'm the best people, but the best people make mistakes. What you've got to do is learn from them, understand what it means. I've sent PowerShell scripts to people before now, and it splurts up some redness, the default error color, and people go, oh, yeah, it's not working. This must be what the problem is. Did you read the error? Well, no, not exactly. Yeah, so don't panic. Read the errors. That's what they're there for. Okay, so a few questions about error handling. First and foremost, depending on who the user is, the target for a lot of our PowerShell scripts, I suspect, are probably vaguely technical people. Although sometimes, there might be those good old lovely end users, the people who don't know one end of a keyboard from the other. So we have to cater for all sorts. But the same question applies across that whole sort of different levels of ability with the user of the script. Is if I tell them the raw error, if it does, then yeah, I'll tell them error. Yeah, I'm expecting a config file, and this config file, whatever .json or XML or TXT or INI or whatever, doesn't exist. And the notes of the script say, yeah, it must exist. So yeah, tell them that. Yeah, the script doesn't exist. Tell them where you've looked for it as well. Give as much information as possible. So you make those errors as self-explanatory as possible. But if it's something that something perhaps low level that's happened and it's not going to mean anything to the user, don't tell them. or at least don't tell them the detail. Say, yeah, there was an error and this is what happened. And as long as you know where in your code it was, so you might have your own error codes, although be careful there. If you start saying, oh, error 5, and your error 5 is different from the standard expected Windows error 5, which is access denied, then it could get complicated. But make sure you feed back enough information, but not too much, so that people run away scared. But even before we get to the error, is there anything we can do to avoid that error? What do we mean by that? Well, I'm going to create a log file. Someone said to write a log file in ctemp, loggy.log file. I can try and write the file there. Oh, but the folder doesn't exist. So am I going to abort my program because the folder doesn't exist, or shall I just help them a little bit and make that folder? And perhaps if that folder's 4 levels deep, then perhaps I'm going to make all 4 levels of that. Although again, with a new item in PowerShell, that's easy enough with a minus force, so it's no big deal. So what can I do to help people, to make the script as error-proof, as user-proof as possible? So if we do think we're going to get an error, can we do something to work around it? Oh, I haven't got this particular file that I need. Oh, can I go and download it from somewhere, from the internet? So can I do an invoke web request and go and get it, put it in place? So to make the whole thing as self-contained and as bulletproof as possible. So if I do report the error, is there anything that I can do, or you can do in the script to actually then fix it to allow it to carry on, which then takes you back to the point of, well, if you can do that, is there any point actually putting an error out? You might want to put something separate out in a log file, or you could just put a small message out rather than red text. Remember, you've got various ways of outputting information to users. You've got your right output, your right warning, your right error, your right host, dare I say it, although with PowerShell 5 it's not quite the sin it used to be to use that. But let's try and fix these things as much as we possibly can. So is it actually something that's going to stop us dead in the water? We cannot continue because this item is missing. It's key to the script. Therefore, we output an error. Well, no, actually, it was just the icing on the cake. So why don't we actually just change that to a warning? Because again, if you're using default colors, a bit of brown text is usually less scary than a bit of red text. And whilst it might make total sense to you, the error message, not everybody who's going to be using this script will understand necessarily how it works or what it does or how it does it. So does it actually make sense to normal people? If it doesn't, why not tone it down a bit? Sorry, I put my teeth. Completely change what the error is. So if it's some sort of low-level synchronization mutex issue, you say that to someone and they go, oh my god, the mutants are coming. It's like, no, that the person doesn't know what a mutex is. As I put a tweet out recently, not deliberately. So it's a case of, all right, well, let me actually turn it into something, fail to synchronize with something else, fail to synchronize with some other thread or some other program, whatever else. Just change it into something slightly more meaningful, something that might actually stick in someone's head. Because if you've ever done end user support, people go, well, it said something about an error. I was like, yeah, well, that's fantastic. Thank you for that feedback. That's really useful. Rather than, oh yeah, it said this. But again, if we can get people to screen capture, so much the better. So if it doesn't make sense, make it make sense, because a non-meaningful error message doesn't really help anybody, particularly to be self-sufficient in fixing the problem. Because if you make the error messages so sort of terse and difficult to understand that every time there's a problem, the person using the script comes back to you, it's like, yeah, do you really want that? Or the error was self-explanatory. You go, oh yeah, this is missing. I need to go install this. Oh yeah, this says that Microsoft KB 123456 needs to be installed. Let me go and do that. Or maybe you could even install that for them. But again, that's where you need to start thinking about, what's the remit for your PowerShell. Because if your PowerShell suddenly becomes something that just fixes every problem known to man, fantastic, but you probably struggle to get a version 1 out there to solve the problem. So you've got to know at what point you go, well, that's something I can't fix or I can't write the code for. Compare with, yeah, I can take that into account. It'll take me an hour to code that, and we can work around that issue if it happens. So you've got to be realistic as well about what your script can do. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it would be lovely to solve global warming, but is that really a problem that your script to create AD users actually needs to worry about? Maybe, maybe not. So as I've just said there, let's change the error text to something that will help people actually know what to do. Knowledge base references, that sort of stuff. And I've put this in there simply because I've seen this so many times before when people just don't read the error message because they're already halfway across the room screaming when they see the red text on the screen. So if that's going to happen, just don't show them. And we'll see how we can hide errors later. But there are times when you should hide errors, and I've got a good example of one this week that I've had to track down where errors were being hidden, which made actual troubleshooting very difficult. So it's getting that right balance. If you've ever done VBS, the good old on error, resume next. Let's ignore all errors. Who cares what happens if there's an error? Yeah, errors happen. Yeah, and we have to accommodate them and deal with it. So errors. What do we mean by errors? Do we mean actual errors where something comes back with an error message? Or do we just mean something didn't happen the way that we wanted it to in our script? Well, again, we'll come on to that as well. There's subtle differences between the two. That's what I mean here. So we check for errors. So you say, okay, well, I'm going to create a folder. So I gave the example before that somebody wanted a log file in a particular folder. Let's go and check the folder exists before we create the file, because if the folder doesn't exist, we try and create the file. Whatever we use, and we'll probably error. So let's go and create the folder. Now, do I assume that if that hasn't returned an error, then it's okay? Or do I do a sort of belt and braces type coding, which is, okay, well, I've created this and it's pretty key to the whole script functionality. Therefore, shall I actually independently check that it works? And again, it's up to you. So, do I create a new folder? So let's actually go in. Let's get a Windows terminal. This is Windows PowerShell 5. I don't use any of that new 7 stuff because trying to convince my customers to install 7 across their estate isn't going to happen. A lot of the time, I actually still have to code stuff for PowerShell 2, which is pretty painful. So I'm sort of stuck in the older world. So let's say I want to create a folder, or in fact, I'm going to start a log file out to, typical way I do a poor man's log file is with a start transcript. So you can give it a path. Notice I'm tab completing everything. As I'm lazy and can't remember stuff. So if I go C temp log folder loggy.log. Did I already have a temporary folder called log folder? I think that's very unlikely.
Could bump the font size there, guys?
Yeah, sure. Watch this. Windows terminal, control scroll. How's that?
Lovely. Yeah, much better. Thank
you. Okay. You can see that that folder actually exists. This is probably a bad example of me trying to, because I'm pretty certain the log folder didn't exist. Let's stop the transcript. Again, I use start and stop transcript, sort of poor man's log file for things like scheduled tasks and so on, rather than write any sort of fancy logging mechanism. Log folder dot blah dot 42. Now, I'm pretty certain that folder doesn't exist. So look, good old start transcript, whoever wrote that command at Microsoft actually goes and creates a folder for you, so you don't have that problem. So yeah, that'll teach me to try and make stuff up as I go along. So let's just stop that transcript. But that's, you know, that's an example of somebody who's written the command alert and thought, okay, well, let me check the path exists. If the path doesn't exist, then I'm going to create it. Because if you try and do something like hello world, set content. Oh, let's get my keyboard fixed. It's terrible. It doesn't type in what I want. And we'll create some other 42.3. See, there we go. Set content is different. Set content couldn't find part of the path. So we'll go, oh, okay. So I'm going to do a new item, which is actually, we've got an alias McDur, if you come from the Linux, Unix world. And we'll create that folder. Could give it other options. Doesn't like the backslash on the end. We've actually now created a file. That was good, wasn't it? Why did we created a file? Because I didn't tell it to create a folder. Now you can do it we could do that several different ways. We could use one of the aliases, so we could do a McDur. Now actually notice here now has made a directory. Now McDur is an example of an alias, so I can say get-alias McDur to see what it actually is. McDur isn't, so what actually is McDur? It's actually a command, well, it's a function. Great stuff. You see why I say I get things wrong and I don't know everything? Yeah, so that's why we have internet search engines, although if you use Bing, you're probably on a hiding to nothing. But what I could have done is, so I've used a McDur. I always thought that was an alias, so I've learnt something in this, even if you guys haven't, while you're laughing at my inability to no, remove item. Yeah, we don't remove items to make directories, do we? So let's do a new item. Guy, get a grip. Yes, sorry. Is it directory? I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, okay. So fantastic demonstration. Finally. Yes, so new item is the generic. I always thought McDur was an alias. Well, you learn, like I said, I learned something. Perhaps if I learn more than my audience, then yeah, perhaps we're doing this the wrong way around. But notice new item. Well, I finally get to where I was trying to be. Actually returns, well, it looks like it returns text. It actually returns an object. Yeah. So a lot of code I would see, people might do this. Or, you know, yeah, okay. Again, we'll come back to this as an example of an error which isn't really an error. Yeah, because you look at it and go, oh my God, it's failed. Help, run away from this red or slightly pink, as it looks to me on my monitor. But if we actually read it, it goes, it already exists. You know, so you can't create something that already exists. So I'd probably want to have some code around this, you know, test path, for instance. Say, does this exist before I actually start creating it? You know, I could use -force, and that will overwrite it. So even if it already exists, it won't error. And there, I've actually got rid of the return as well, because I've assigned it to $null. I could pipe it through out-null, although the overhead of creating a pipe is slightly greater than assigning something, or I could cast it to void. So for instance, void. Yeah, so 3 different ways to throw away. But do I actually want to throw away what it's producing? Well, no, because if we assign it to actually a variable, so let's say call it new folder. Always use meaningful variable names. That's always a good start as well. Don't abbreviate. Why not? Because you can just tab complete them in pretty much everything. So I've now got new folder. So what is new folder? Well, new folder is going to be the output of what we had before. But I can say something like if not. So I could either put -not, or I could put exclamation mark, bang, or shriek, or whatever you want to call it. Not $new folder. then that's me actually testing. So if we put all this together, what we can actually say, we can do it two ways. Excuse me. Quick drink, which I managed to spill on the keyboard. I'm having a good day today. We don't need to assign it to a variable. Right, I'm just going to go on mute for a moment, try and sort my voice out. Right, hopefully that's fixed it with a bit of non-alcoholic squash. So what I can actually say here is I can assign it to a variable if I want, but if I'm not going to actually use the variable, we can say, created OK. So this time, if I want to check for it negative, I need to be slightly different, need to put some extra brackets around it. But this way, rather than assuming something's worked, remember, of course, make sure we've got it the right way around. So it's not created OK. So if I try and create that on a drive that doesn't exist, pick a drive that doesn't exist, J drive. Yeah. So you can see it produced the error. So it's still got redness, pinkness, but you will see also down here, because new item didn't return anything, it effectively returned null. I'm saying if not null, then do this. So I could, of course, then put in here minus error action silently continue. Not create OK. So the error has gone away. But now let me have a look and see within my error. So the not created OK statement within my curly braces would be my error handler. So it'd be a case of, okay, well, let me go and have a look, see if this drive exists. Okay, this drive doesn't exist. Now, J drive in a company might be a standard drive mapping for which some reason hasn't mapped. So your script could at that point go, actually, yeah, the J drive isn't mapped. Let me map that to this particular. But again, that would be obviously specific to a particular customer. But what you don't want to do is that, because your brackets don't match. Yeah. See, I did that deliberately just to check I was watching, and I was. So has that worked or not? I don't know. Probably not, because it hasn't returned anything, but there's no error. See, so this is why I say you can use error action silently continue, or if you want to be more perverse, it's got an abbreviation, and you can actually put 0 instead of silently continue. But I hate that. Minus EA0. What does that mean? Yeah, always make everything explicit. Yeah, because I can tab complete it. As soon as I hit S, I can start tab completing. So make your code as readable as possible. I'll tell you what, as you get old, as I am, unfortunately, you'll thank yourself for it, not just because of sharing code with other people, but when you come and look at code that you wrote yourself, 6, 12, for me, minutes ago. For most of you, probably 6, 12 months ago, you look at it and think, oh yeah, that's what that does. So we don't do things like, minus I directory, minus F. Now they may or may not be unique. We'll find out in a moment. Notice use of control end to delete to end of line there. Yeah, so if I go and read that, I mean, at least I've got path in there, I suppose, but I don't need path because path, again, could be used implicitly. Yeah, which is easier to read. Again, this is all about making robust code, because if somebody comes and looks at your code and think, oh, this bit trying to make the folder isn't quite working right, and if it's not, totally self-explanatory, you think, oh, I wonder what they're doing here. Yeah, let me try changing it. So you might even need comments in here. Yeah. Could be careful with comments that you don't have too many, so that your code is all comments. But if something was difficult to write, or you've not done something as straightforward as perhaps you think it should be, then it's worth a comment. But don't forget to update your comments if you update the code. But sort of going on from here, so I'm saying new item, so we can see it returns, it returns an object, and we can test whether that object exists or not, or is null or not. But we could also then check to see if the path actually exists. So if we go back to the one I did actually create, I hope, but we'll find out. And we can see that returns Boolean, so that returns true. So typically what we'd have in our code is something like if not space bar, yes, I'd like you to work. Then we'd have a new folder equals new item, and then within there, once we'd new folder's been set, we'd then check that the new folder has been created. We could even then do the test path again. It depends how much you want to make your code be bulletproof. What happens if you create the folder and then somebody or something deletes it afterwards before you get to use it? Is that a possibility? If that's unlikely, then probably don't code for it. But if you create, let's say you create a temporary folder in the temporary folder for the user, so $m temp or %temp% in the old world. But you create that folder when the script first runs, and the script runs for well, let's say the script runs forever. You sleep every 60 seconds or something like that, and then do something else. Do you actually then need to check every 60 seconds that your temporary folder still exists that you created at the top of your script? Because somebody may have been in and just tidied up temporary folders. I've seen plenty of programs crash when I've gone in, clean up excessive temporary folders, and then the next time that program does something, it falls over because it's assumed that its temporary folder that it created is still there. If your whole script is only going to run for 5 seconds, then you probably don't need to keep checking that your temporary folder's gone. But if your script is designed to stay running for a while, then it's probably a good idea if you use a folder to make sure it's still there, and if not, recreate it. Why? Again, you're just error proofing and say, well, my user shouldn't be stupid enough to go and remove temporary folders while I'm running a script. Well, they might forget it's running. They might not even know that it's running. So that's what I'm saying about writing bulletproof code. Every time you write something in the code, think, what could break this? And that's probably where I got my reputation as the bug whisperer when I worked for a company called AppSense. Why? Because I always found ways to break software. Not deliberately. Well, slightly deliberately, perhaps. And I wouldn't necessarily have access to the source code, but it's a case of, well, if this is writing a folder here, and I haven't used the console for 3 hours, and it's assuming that folder still exists, what happens if I delete it? Oh, look, the console falls over. So it's understanding how something works, and therefore how to break it. Now you might say, well, I haven't got the time to make my scripts bulletproof. Well, it depends what it is. If it's a script that's just going to help save somebody 5 minutes in filing their expenses, maybe. But if it's a script that's going to help you control a nuclear power station, then perhaps you want to write it a bit more bulletproof. So again, you've got to decide how much error checking you put in. Do you spend all your life putting ifs and checks and repeated checks in and not actually get to the point of what your script is going to do? Or do you just ignore all that stuff and go, well, let's hope it works okay? It's getting the balance. Whatever you do, just be consistent. So don't check something worked on one line, but then don't bother checking something else very similar didn't work. A lot of code I get to see from people, nobody checks errors at all. Say, right, I'll create a new one of these, I'll create a new one of these using that new thing I created, and but what if something's failed? Because if something's failed, then you're just going to get error after error after error, and it's going to be difficult to see the proverbial wood for the proverbial trees. There's be so much redness, it'll be totally confusing. Whereas at the first error, why not trap it and go, yep, this failed. give as much context as possible. Yeah, there's no point continuing rather than just going error, 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 error. So something's got pages of that horrible red text. So I'd say put error checking in and be consistent. The overhead of it, of writing an if around stuff or assigning something to a variable and testing it, isn't that great. Believe me, it's the sort of stuff I do every day, even on weekends. But what's a weekend these days? It's all the same, isn't it? And I've already demonstrated this intentionally, obviously, or not, as the case may be, which is we get errors when things have actually worked okay. So you remember if I was doing this create new item when the item already exists and it errors. So you've got to make sure your code knows what's something that's expected, something that isn't expected. So there will be this class. So watch out for those. They can be a bit surprising at times. If you are ignoring an error, so you have a error action silently continue, or maybe even a try catch block around it with an empty catch. And again, we'll come to try catch exceptions later. Say why you're ignoring it. Again, a help for yourself, if nobody else. Yeah. Not always obvious. Yes, I've seen a few of these. I'm not going to name any names, but yeah, the beauty of PowerShell is anybody can pick it up and start writing stuff. The downside of PowerShell is the same, that people who sort of don't understand about maybe there being different channels for output. So standard out, standard in, standard error, something that comes from the Unix world that I've been using since the 80s. So I'm kind of used to it, but programming language before don't necessarily understand about being able to output to the error channel. You can actually do it in CMD as well. The error channel is number 2, and you can dump to your number 2s in CMDs as well as in PowerShell. So it's a concept that they've both taken from Unix, and the PowerShell guys won't try and pretend otherwise, because they take the best examples of what's already there and add it to their tooling. So I've seen modules where the output has either gone to standard output, or even worse, has gone out via write host. If you use write-host, you can't redirect it anywhere. Well, you can with PowerShell 5, but you can't redirect it anywhere. So actually trying to see if you've had an error via a write console is write host, sorry, can be a bit of a pain in the posterior. So just watch out for those. And quite often I'll deliberately call particularly third-party modules, get them to generate errors to see how they actually do their error handling. Do they set the error variable? Do they throw an exception? How can I catch it? Oh, look, it doesn't even generate an exception. Doesn't even generate an error. Right, so I need to do some extra coding around it to make sure what I've asked it to do. Let's say I've asked it to create a new item of something in that third-party module, and it doesn't error if it doesn't work. Then I'll need to write some extra code to say, does that now exist? So always write your code from the perspective of what if this fails? What if this fails? Yeah, and once that becomes second nature, it's not going to slow you down. Believe me. Yeah. I put that in there because yes, I have been bitten by it, and I can see Adam nodding as well. This is a lovely one, and who do we blame? It's difficult, really. Windows APIs, so things underlying Windows. I released a new script today that calls some Windows WTS, Windows Terminal Service, or RDS APIs. Now, some of those return a Boolean value, where false, meaning failure, is 0, and anything non-zero, so it could be 1 or it could be 100, is true. So that means success. But there are also APIs which return something called empty status, where error success is 0. So 0 can be success or failure, depending on what you're calling, which can be quite confusing, and the same can happen in PowerShell as well. you really need to understand ultimately, I suppose, the documentation, if there is any, for what it is you're calling. Does it return a count of what it's managed to do? So 0 might not be an error, but it might mean that it hasn't been able to do anything. Or does it throw an exception, or does it not return anything at all? Quite a lot of commandlets actually don't return anything. Some have a minus pass through to return an object. So you can do as I was before with things like the new item. So you would use a minus pass through, because again, if it fails, hopefully it'll return which you can, $null, which you can test for. But again, this is why you need to test when you run your scripts, or even before you start writing the scripts, just when you're playing with third-party modules and commandlets for the first time. So I do a lot with sort of Citrix, VMware, for instance. So I need to make sure I understand how their commandlets are going to handle errors. So let me deliberately let me tell it to get a virtual machine doesn't exist, or to delete something doesn't exist, so that I know how to handle it when that actually occurs in my code. So knowing what a good return or a bad return is, and how to differentiate between them, more importantly, is quite key as well. So some of this we've already seen in my rather poor demonstrations, but that was the same. We all make mistakes, so hopefully that'll make you think that, well, if Guy makes mistakes and I still make mistakes, so what? Yeah, to err is the human. Yeah, to really screw up, you need a computer programmed by PowerShell. So if something returns a status or a count or any indicator of success or failure, then I would generally say check it. Yeah, sometimes there are some things that you might not want to check. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. It might be, I failed to update a status indicator. Well, do I really want to tell somebody that? Maybe not. But if I'm creating a new item that's key to my script, as we've seen with things like new item, then I do want to check that it's has actually returned something. So I can either assign that to a variable and check it later. So as we saw with new item, I could go back to that window. So things like the new item, I could assign it to, where did we go? Lots of redness. I'll tell you what, let's clear the screen. Let's start again. Let's use searching. Control R. I think I called it new folder. Yep, there we go. Control R again. There we go. So again, persistent command line searching with Control R, incredibly useful. I found something only last week that I needed, which I hadn't used or hadn't accessed on the command line since early last year, I think. And I found, because my local profile, where my history file is persistent, so I've got something like 14,000 lines in that history file now. So Control R, and particularly for demos as well, like this, can help you find stuff you've already typed. So I can new folder there. I can do other commands now. So I could see, what date is it? I can do other stuff, but I could now then check that new folder is available. We'll come on to the actual error variable later, because there's some nuances with that. That's what I mean. So catched return value, even if you don't check it straight away, I tend to check things straight away. So I would tend to do I might even do this, which some people don't like, where I'm actually doing an assignment and a condition check in one. Yeah, so I'm actually assigning to new folder, and the result of that is being checked whether it's null or not null. That does confuse a few people. So if that does confuse you, do it in two separate lines. Do your new folder, and then do your new folder assignment, and then just Control Z to undo. Then do your if $new folder. Do it that way. You're not being marked on the number of lines you produce. So if you want to do something in 2 or 3 lines instead of 1, yep, so much better. In fact, hopefully I've got a note in this deck later on, which is avoid one-liners. So it's not necessarily robustness, but some people thrive on writing these horrendously long PowerShell one-liners. Yeah, just run this, which spans to hundreds of columns, hundreds of characters long, and it's like, well, I don't really understand it. Yeah, so unless there's a speed benefit doing that, and I mean a significant speed benefit, something runs in 10 seconds instead of 10 minutes, then don't do it, because it just makes it harder to understand. A few times I do that is generally when I've got something I've prepared earlier, and I'll go and copy and paste it from there. I'm not sitting and I'm going to type the whole one-liner in the whole time. So validate return values. Something, in fact, last time I gave this talk, a lot of people didn't actually seem to know about is this built-in variable called $question mark, which is actually the status of the previously executed command. So if we say new folder equals that, and I go $question mark, it goes true. So I could put an if around that if I wanted to and say, has this worked okay? Because if it doesn't work okay, go back to the good old J drive, which I know doesn't exist unless it's magically appeared. You never know. What's $question mark now? False. So that we can use that, particularly useful when things don't necessarily return a value. Again, this is on the command alerts you're using. The standard Microsoft ones, they will almost certainly return status, but otherwise, the $question mark will give you the fact whether did it work or not. But test it, before you start relying on it, particularly if it's a third-party command alert. Make sure that $question mark is false. If something fails, assume makes an ass of you and me. Okay, so now we get on to built-in $error, which we'll go and have a look at in a moment. So one important thing to note with that is it's an array. So it's 0, 1, or more errors that have occurred at some point in time. So if we go and have a look in here, $error, how many have I actually got? Oh, don't expect me to count them. It's an array, so I can say count, or of course I could pipe it through. Pipe it? Oh, I could pipe it. Sorry, we're not in Bristol, are we? Through measure. Yeah, so I've actually got 11 errors. 11 errors. What from? Well, all the things that I've done in this window since I opened it, or since I cleared the errors. What's the most recent one? Well, it always puts the most recent error in as error 0. So we can look at error 0 specifically. And that was from my demonstration of $question mark. But if that wasn't the last thing I did, so if I do get -date minus fromat, deliberate typo, you won't see me do many of those, G. Notice now that error has changed. So my previous error about the drive has actually become error 1. So what I'm trying to get across here is that if you are going to use the built-in error variable, as soon as you can, because as soon as you run anything else, there's the possibility that another error has occurred. And if you go and look at $error 0, it isn't the error you thought it was. But again, that takes me back to the other thing that was on that slide, which is we can actually clear the error because it's an array. So again, well, what is it? Well, anything in PowerShell, we can always call its .getType method, and we can see there it's an array or an array list. So what can I do with it? Well, GM forget method, or something not a lot of people seem to know is if I hit Control, so tab, you can tab through stuff. You probably know that already. Did you know about Control Space? Control Space brings up the whole list, which can be quite large, but you can then actually cursor through it. And if you notice bottom left, you'll see it actually tells you, the type of the argument or what it's and whether they're functions, which is quite useful. But you'll see one of the things we've got here, if I can actually see it, is clear. Okay, so I'm going to move the cursor keys over to there, clear. It doesn't take any arguments. So now I've got no errors. Yeah. Sorry, no drink. So if I create a new item again, so again using Control R to search back, well, that error, it's just that one error now. Yeah. So generally good practice to clear the errors when you start something so that you're in control of the errors. Now the next thing we'll mention is sort of goes hand in hand with this. Oh, and by the way, error itself is an object. So if we actually have a look at this error, you'll see it's got a number of other methods, such as the exception in there, the error details. So when we actually do a error 0, it's effectively calling a toString on it. So if you want to, we'll talk later, we'll see about how we can actually trap a particular error as a / exception. And as long as you're using sort of advanced functions, you've got the commandlet binding in your function or your scripts, you'll always have error variable available. What does that give us? Well, that means we can sort of save the error specifically for a specific command. So if I go back to my new folder for my J drive, so we know it's going to fail, and I'm going to do error. So notice this time it's wrapped slightly, but I've got error variable, and I'm going to call it guys error. Notice I don't put a dollar in front of it because this is the name of a variable. So that's just repeating the error. But yeah, what's the advantage of that? Well, what I could do is actually error action silently continue. Yeah. So have I got a new folder? No. So that probably tells me an error. Notice guys error now has that particular error in it, so I can actually check that. So what have I succeeded in doing here? So when I ran that command, I've succeeded in not scaring the user with this red scary stuff. But what I have done is I've got that error in here. So I could check new folder. So I could say if not new folder, then something's gone wrong. I could actually look at the error. I could actually say, does it contain a drive with the name? Yeah. So let's see if I do this. Match. I'm going to use a scary regular expression. Guess what the scary regular expression for a drive with the name is? It's in fact a drive with the name. Yeah, regular expressions don't have to be scary. Yeah, don't be scared of regular expressions. In fact, if I ever get invited back here, I could do that as well. Regular expressions for beginners, because regular expressions can be very powerful. Is that going to work? No, that hasn't actually worked. And what I'm going to do is so I actually needed to specifically look at it rather than the whole item. So what we've seen there is I've forced it to a string. So effectively told it to do that. Does it match a drive with the name? Yes. In fact, what I could probably do is I'm going to go do a little bit more scary stuff now. I'm going to put a dot star in, which means anything. Does not exist. Yes. So I could actually say, oh, okay, that drive doesn't exist. Do I need to then go and find that drive, map it? Or do I just need to say, look, mate, you've put in this drive and it just doesn't exist. I don't know what it's going to be. Can't map it for you. Is this what you mean? Is this what you meant to type? Might be that there's also a K drive. And you could go and have a look and say, oh, that folder exists on the K drive. So you could put that in your error message saying, yeah, this J drive folder doesn't exist, but there is one on the K drive folder. Did you mean to use that one instead? You could even ask them interactively in the script if you really wanted to do it, rather than making them run the script again and change that J to a K and say, would you like me to change the path to K whatever? Yeah. So again, come back to that point of how much you really want to guide people and help people. So this way I would use error variable typically with error action silently, continue, so that I can get the error and then look at the error if there has been an error and decide what I want to do. Do I want to go and do something clever, or do I just want to go, no, don't know what to do. Here's the error, because of course you can still do a write error with your error. Yeah, so we can turn it into red if we want. Or we can even throw it as an exception, but we'll get to exceptions in a little bit. So some items, for instance, don't necessarily return a value. And again, how do I know whether they do or not? A, you test them, and B, you RTFM, as we say. You look at the documentation, as it should say what it returns. Some things will return no value. So, for instance, let's have add something to new folder minus member type note property minus name. We're going to add it, give it the guy, and I'll set it a value of Leech. New folder. New folders null? What do you mean new folders null? Don't you love these live demos? No, Guy, we don't. We like them to work, please. To try better next time. Yep, okay, you can all have your money back. Oh yeah, because it doesn't exist. Why? Because I've been trying to create it on the J drive. Yeah, there's always a reason for these things. Okay, so let's actually make it so new folder isn't null. Let's actually check that this time. See, there's always a reason for things, even if you can't figure it out. So this time I'm going to add a member. Again, it doesn't really matter about if you've not used the add member before, but it's a very useful way of adding more properties to a particular object. Now, has that worked or not? Yeah. So I could say $, question mark, suggest it has, or one of the other things I could do. Now, actually, if I run it again, we can see it doesn't work. Why? Because it's already got the value. I'd have to use -force. But notice here in the error message for add member, even somebody who wrote that saying add member, cannot add a member to overwrite the member anyway, add the force parameter to your command. So see, this is an example of a useful error message. So it's telling you, the programmer, yeah, it exists. And if you kind of half expecting it to exist, because it could be a problem in the case of that shouldn't exist, so there's a problem with the code, fair enough. But you think, well, yeah, that could have existed already. It's without that bit I've just highlighted, you'd have to go back to the manual page and try and figure out and say, well, do I have to remove the object first? It's actually telling you, yeah, add the force. Yeah, use the force. Pity I'm not called Luke, but hey. Yeah, so that's what I mean about writing meaningful error messages. So whoever did add member has done a good job there. So if I do -force, back to not erroring, but again, if I could either look at question mark, or what I can do, which is what was on the slide, I can do a -pass-through. And what that does is return the object that's now been updated. So you can see it returns a new folder. It would actually have a property guy, but that's not in the default output for that particular object type. So I could then have an if around it. So if not, yeah, and then do my error handling. So that's just an example of using pass-through. So some various things use pass-through. The idea of the pass-through really is not so much for error handling, but it's so that on a pipeline, you can pipe, the out. Although if you're doing that, and you've got PowerShell 3 or above, it's actually better to use -notes property members, because that actually takes a hash table, so you can do it all in one call. As I said before, every time you set up a pipe operation, it's going to take a little bit extra to set up that pipe and close it down for that matter as well. So that's where we can use -pass-through also for checking that something's come through. I sometimes use that as well in other commandlets where I'm not so much checking for whether it's completely worked or not, but from the object I get back, I want to check that what I've done to it has actually taken effect. So if I've not so much added something to it, but some of the Citrix commandlets I use for creating things and changing things will return the new object, and then you can test that property of the new object to make sure it is actually set to what you want to do, or what you wanted it to be set to, which is more efficient than calling it to make that change and then calling a get on that particular object to get the object again. So again, it's about efficiency as well. And something I've already mentioned, which is those extra checks. Like I was saying before about creating a temporary folder. Do you do it right at the start of your script, but then find, because your script's been running for 2 hours, that somebody's deleted that folder or renamed it? Then you come back and check it again. You check you actually created it. Belt and braces. Again, know the commandlets you're using. A lot of third-party stuff tends to be a little bit poor, should we say, at error checking. So belt and braces. Yeah, even if it hasn't given an error, check it has actually done what you wanted it to do. But don't go stupid. Don't write 4,000 lines of code where 4 would do. Okay, exceptions, which I know scare a few people, but these are pretty straightforward to control. Depends what you want to do with them, really, how granular you want to get. You want to say, actually, if this exception happens, then I want to do this. But if this different type of exception happens, then I'm going to do something different. And ultimately, again, having worked with a fellow Citrix CTP recently, he struggles to find, is that an error? Is that just an error? Or is that an exception? Two are subtly different. Because the idea with exception handling, this is something, again, that's C++, is actually designed to simplify error checking. A lot of you look at this and go, "Ooh, actually, it makes it more complicated." Yes and no. If you understand the principles behind it, it can help you actually understand it. So why is it designed to simplify error checking? Well, the idea is really that, let's say you're 10 levels deep in a program. So you've gone down a load of functions, you're right down at the bottom level, and something goes wrong. Now, do you write code at every single of those 10 layers to say, oh, if what's come back is an error, then do this, and then have effectively have 10 different lots of error handling? It might be you need to do that, because at one of those levels you could perhaps retry the operation or retry it with different parameters. But ultimately, the idea with an exception is that when a program throws an exception, that it looks for a handler. And if there isn't a handler at the level that it's at, it will pop back up the stack, as in return from the function it was in. Have a look for a handler there. If there wasn't one there, it'll pop back up all the way to the top level. And if there isn't one actually at the top level, you'll see this particularly with C++ programs, you'll generally get an unhandled exception, an error message. You may even get a crash dump. Because exceptions aren't necessarily a bad thing. They are a way for code to communicate with you that something bad has, particularly when you can't have return codes. Why can't you have return codes? Well, again, in something like C++, you have this concept of classes and constructors. And if a class constructor fails, it's very difficult for it to return a null value or return an error code. So it just throws an exception instead, because they can be caught, regardless of whether something returns an error or not. So exceptions, in theory, are great, but for PowerShell programmers, they can be a bit of a pain in the posterior, because it's a case of, well, if I get a problem here, is it going to be an error that I can check in error variable, or I can redirect to my own error variable, or is it actually an exception? Do I need to put a try catch around? Do I need to put a try? Because if you end up having to put a try catch around every single piece of code you've got, it's going to make it very unwieldy. It's going to make it difficult to understand. It's going to be difficult to understand what's at what level. So I tend to use try catch sparingly. So I'll typically have one around my whole code. So even if my code is going to go several levels deep down functions, what I'll actually do is have a try catch right at the top level of my script, mainly because with try catch, you can also have something called finally. So for instance, if I start a log file, or I create a temporary file, particularly if that temporary file ends up being large or something. What I want to do is make sure I always do the tidy my code before I exit to the big bad world and release control. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, you can. That might be an old message, perhaps. Yeah. Good. Okay. I'm just interrupting myself, so that's good. Yeah. So I have a try catch and then a finally block around stuff, so I can do all my tidy up. And you'll find that even if a script is killed, it will still go into that finally block. So that's good for just general tidy up. And all your catch block needs to do there, if you're not doing anything particular to catch an exception, is just throw the exception again. So you end up with something. In fact, let me go and find. Let me see if I can find some code with that in. I did mean to load up a few snippets. This is where, if we were in the flesh, I'd hear lots of laughs. People going, "You're not using PowerShell code, guy. You're using all this old tooling. How very dare you?" And to be honest, my old answer used to be in that I did a lot of scripting on customer systems, and you always have to go with what's the lowest common denominator, and you can't guarantee that you've got PowerShell. Usually guarantee you've got PowerShell ISE. More recently, I'm stuck in my old ways, I guess. Something else that's actually worth me mentioning, because once you get up quite a large sort of script repository, either of your own scripts or third-party scripts, then searching them, you think, well, where did I find that in that script before? If you search my Twitter history, for sort of things like index and search, you'll find that I advocate turning on full text indexing of .ps1s, PSM1s, PSD1s, all the PowerShell files. So in here, I can actually put in a PowerShell term, and it will go and find every script. So there's one, for instance, I was writing the other day. You've just opened a notepad. Yes, thanks. So you see here, well, I've got a try. And we go right to the bottom. This is typically what I'll have. So this is me making sure I Control Plus, of course, with the Windows 10 Notepad, allowing you to zoom so you don't have to change the font size. So you can see the catch here. I'm not doing anything. I'm just $_ is the exception I've got. So inside any curly braces, $_ is the object that's been passed in. So that just, if you like, rethrows the exception. But the finally block is always going to be executed. So if I have been passed a log file name, so here I'm testing it's not null. Be careful if you're using $PS bound parameters. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's fine. But if you do know what I'm talking about, be careful in try catch, because I've found that the $PS bound parameters doesn't work very well in a try catch. So hence I'm actually testing $log file as a parameter. I'm testing it's not null or empty. So the clue's in the name. Again, when you're writing functions and things like that, give them meaningful names. So you can see here, log file is a parameter in my param block. So that's what I mean about just using try catch around everything. So if this code went through an exception, it would report the exception, but more importantly, it would do the tidy up. So I write some pretty big temp files on some of my scripts, so I need to make sure I'm not leaving those lying around, because after the script is errored a few times, suddenly you've got no disk space left. Again, that's what I'm saying about writing robust code. Is something, we ran guys script a few times, then we ran out of disk space. Oh right, okay, yeah. So it's making sure you tidy up after yourself. So Newton's law: for every action, there should be an equal and opposite reaction. So if you, for instance, create a temporary file, you should remove it. If you create a temporary folder, you should remove it. We know a lot of people don't, but just because other people don't doesn't mean you shouldn't. Again, because I've got this example up, I'll show you here, for instance. So copy item, which again is the alias copy that you probably use on the PowerShell command line. A question mark here to make sure that the copy succeeded. And I'm doing a belt and braces. notice here, I'm using full parameter names, because if I didn't, I could have got away with doing that. And you just have to know its source and destination. But this is why we use name parameters, so we don't leave anything to chance. So that's copying that file to that file. Again, you don't need to know what the script does. It is on GitHub if you want it. But this is just an example of sort of lots of error checking. So this is what one of my scripts looks like with error checking in. So I'm saying copy it to that file. But because it's actually quite a key file to what this script does, I'm saying, okay, well, if it was successful, so if $? Is true, I don't need to put equals $true, and what I copied it to also exists. So making sure the copy really, really did work. Then I'm carrying on. I'm actually starting a process. And again, notice here, I'm using a pass-through because start process on its own doesn't return anything. So I'm assigning a variable. I'm actually PS script analyzer, which we'll talk about briefly later, would warn me I'm setting something that I'm not using, but I could interrogate that launched variable. But the point is, if that's null, so if not launched equals with the pass-through, so if it fails, that will be null. So if not null will be true, then I throw an exception. Yeah. And a lot of my code, I tend to, if you see here, so if I get fatal errors, I tend to throw exceptions. Why? So that it does the exit all in one as well. What you could do is do a write error, this happened, and then do an exit or return out of your function. That's the beauty of a throw, is it passes control back to the nearest handler, or if there isn't a catch handler block, then it just exits the whole script. So this is just a typical sort of script. So you see a lot of error checking. Does it make it more difficult to understand? Yeah, possibly. So I could probably have done this in a dozen lines. And if it worked, great. But what if it didn't work? Yeah. Then I want to give specific, meaningful error messages. For instance, here, an object, but I only want one object. So I can actually say, is it an array? Because this will return either a single item or an array object, depending on how many items were selected in this particular grid view, one of my favorite Windows PowerShell commandlets. If it is an array, I put an error, only one service should be selected. I actually tell them how many were selected. Yeah. It could say, well, I'm going to pick the first, but if it's something important, are you sure they meant to pick the first one? It might be the second one. Again, if you're controlling that nuclear power station, that might not be the right decision. So just an example of some real life error handling I had sort of when talking about exceptions. So we've seen me having this try catch with the finally as well, which can be quite useful. Our catch block can be empty. Is that wise? It can be. It depends what you're doing. So hash tables, for instance, dictionaries as they're called. So let's just make a quick hash table. $guys table, and we'll give it a guy. God, making up data, it's really difficult, isn't it? So I've now got a hash table. So I could say $guys table. Oh, this keyboard, I must get it replaced. Look how bad it is. So I'm going to add an Adam. See if I can get invited back. So now I did that, and we look at guys table. Yeah, great. Okay, it's got a couple of items in. But what if I try and add Adam as a fantastic bloke as well as a great bloke? Notice it's an exception because add, as we saw here, doesn't return anything. Yeah, so I didn't get anything back. It didn't tell me where it put it or anything like that. So that makes me think, well, how do I know if there's an error? Well, if it's an error, because a hash table, this item, the key has to be unique, then it's actually throwing me an exception. Now, sometimes I'll use a hash table to see if I've used something before, and if I have used it before, then it's not an error. So what I might want to do is around this bit, do a try. It doesn't really matter about your curly braces on the same line or different lines. It's a personal style thing. Catch. I'll go in here. Bad. Not Adam, of course. No, Adam's a fantastic bloke, as it says there. Yeah. So you can see, but what I could do, in fact, is an empty catch block. Yeah. Because if I, and again, this is one place I do use it quite a lot, is with hash tables. Sometimes you might want to allow duplicate items, and your value for your key actually then becomes an array. So that's another way you can actually have multiple items if you wanted to. But depending on what you're using it for, quite a lot of my hash tables are just quick lookup tables. Say, have I got this? Yes or no. So if I go and add a second item, then I don't care. Then I might have an empty catch block. That's equivalent to having your error action silently continue. Yeah. Only do it when you know that ignoring the error is okay within your code. Don't do it just because you're getting an exception you don't understand. If you're ignoring an error that you don't understand, yeah, that's not great, because that will come back to bite you, I'm fairly certain. So I was saying, so ignore them, but again, ignore them at peril. So if I had this in code, I would say, okay, in my catch block, I'll probably just have a comment which said, duplicate item. Although, of course, what I could do is I can actually look at the exception within here. I can look at $_, which is the most recent exception. So I could see if it is an item that's already been added. But what if it's some other item? What if it's some other error? Well, with the hash table, touch wood, I've not seen anything other than this when adding to a hash table yet. Also betting I see something completely weird tomorrow, but hey ho, just jinx myself. So I want to say is we could catch a specific exception if we wanted to, if there was something we could do with that particular exception but not another one if we wanted to, so we can get a very specific, or we can just ignore it. But if you do ignore it, put in a comment as to why you're ignoring it, why it's safe to do so. So I'm saying we can use the $_. So this is an example of catching a specific exception. So I could have used that for the new folder example with my good old J drive. What I used to forget is, well, how do I know what the exception is? Well, when you get an exception, so you have a catch before you put your specific exception in, because you don't necessarily know what's going to be in here. You just have a generic catch, and in there you can actually, particularly if you use something like ISE or Visual Studio Code and set a breakpoint in, you can actually run you can run the $_ exception to see what the full type is. So if you do the $exception get type, as we saw before, will tell us what type it is, full name, then if it was a drive not found, it would be that, and I could then pay catch block to say I'm going to specifically catch this type of exception. What if it's not that type of exception? Well, that's where you need another more general catch block. So it might be, okay, well, if I get this type of exception, then I'm going to see, can I map that drive? Is it one that, there's a corporate standard and I just need to map it? Or do I need to see if it meant to be another drive? But if it's some other sort of exception and I can't deal with it, then I might just throw the exception, throw $_, as we saw in some of my code a moment ago. Depends how specific you want to be. I don't do much of this specific exception catching, but I've got a few bits of it. So we've seen the finally already, sort of tidying up for temp files and things like that. Oh, and this lovely one. Have you seen these before when trying to debug scripts? You know it's somewhere deep in the bowels of this 1,000-line script, and they go error at line 1 char 1. That's probably because actually somebody's put mine as error action continue, or has just got a try catch block around everything, and it gets caught at the top level. It's horrible. So quite often when I'm developing code, I'll leave the top level try catch block out to start with. Although there is, I forget off the top of my head, there is a way of actually getting the line number. I've probably tweeted about it somewhere. In fact, that's the way I generally remind myself of the things I've found in the past. Is I use Twitter as my own personal knowledge base, so I can type in the search box from : Guy Leech and then look for stuff, because there is a specific way to get the real line number if you want, where the error actually occurred, because line 1 char 1 doesn't really help, because that's usually a comment. Okay, so writing robust code isn't just about error handling. It's writing code that is, dare I say, bulletproof. I was going to call it that session something like that, but I thought that might be setting me up for an argument. But hey, I like arguments. No, I don't. Yes, I do. Okay. So strong typing says, how's this going to help? Well, by declaring variables, it really does help catch these what I call static errors. So things that, well, not necessarily compiler because it's not a compiled language, but the interpreter can pick up what it's just looking at code. So rather than actually at runtime, it'll go, hold on, you're using this variable and you've not declared it. Something we all see and C++ is you couldn't use a variable unless you defined it. It would go, this variable doesn't exist. Whereas in PowerShell, as soon as you start using it, it does an implicit declaration, which is great until you then typo something. And you think you're using the variable that you declared earlier, but you've actually created a brand new variable with 2 of the letters switched round. It's like, yes, that can be a bit of a pain. So VBS, if you've come from that world, you can have the option explicit, which I always do to make sure that anything I'm using has been declared. PowerShell, we can use something called set-strict mode, which is something I will always use. So I think I'm jumping ahead. I've got this in the slide somewhere. But, so if we go $Fred, I probably don't have a $Fred. But if I have $Fred equals $blogs. So what's $Fred? It's null. But if I do a set strict mode minus version latest. See now, the variable blogs cannot be retrieved because it's not been set. That has saved my bacon on more times than I care to remember. So I don't put I don't put that in my scripts, because I'm not brave enough. But my development environment, I'm actually quite surprised it's not set here, because my PowerShell profile should have that set. I'll need to check that afterwards. I will always have that in any environment where I'm actually writing and testing a script, so that these sorts of errors will be pulled up. Because more often than not, it's because you've typoed something. Again, use tab complete for variables, but sometimes you'll accidentally or deliberately have 2 variables which you think are the same, but they're not. They've got 2 letters switched round, or you've got an I instead of a 1 or something like that. So strict mode is your friend. But let's also, where possible, declare the type, because that makes it easier with IntelliSense, when you're tab completing methods, but it also makes it easier to find problems where your logic's wrong. So I would typically, if Fred was a string, and before I started using Fred, I would do a string $Fred, and I'll assign it something null or the empty string, but I'd define it to something. Again, this comes from my old C days. In the old days of C, if you declared a variable, which you had to do, if you didn't actually set it to a known value, it had random data in it. It wasn't 0. This is before the days of security breaches and buffer overruns and that sort of stuff. So you just got whatever was last in that variable in memory. So if you used it before you'd set it, you'd have all sorts of weird and wonderful random behavior because the value of it would be null, be guaranteed to be 0 or null. It could be anything. So now I always make sure I strongly type something, and I will set it to a known value. If it's an int, integer type, numeric type, quite often I'll use -1, because if you're passing a parameter, so in your param block, an int or an int32 or whatever, and if it's not passed, then it will be 0. So if you set something to -1, you know that you've set it to -1. The default value it gets from a param block won't be -1 unless you've set the default to be -1. And again, that's why I'm suggesting the way to write the script. So if we look at one of the latest scripts I've written, due to be released shortly when I get around to writing the help, which isn't even in here, it's got a huge param block. Why? Well, because I don't hard code things. So look at that for a param block. Yeah, it barely fits on my full HD screen. Why? Because most will have defaults. So most of these don't need to be specified. So I don't need to specify, where are they? Line 59. So what, 30 parameters? I don't need to specify 30 parameters. Yeah, most will default. Where notice I've put, put a type for something. I've put a default value for it, so people don't have to put those in. Where possible, I've also made sure that if it's a particular string, for instance, that can only be a couple of types, then we use a validate set. Yeah, so we're validating input as much as we possibly can. Because when you write a script and you write param blocks, people are either going to think, oh, how could I break this script? How could I cause a SQL injection error or whatever else? Or they go, oh, I don't know, what should I put in for this? So the more you can guide people, sanity check parameters either here, so that wouldn't even allow you to type anything in for, if you did a minus delivery type of Bob, that would go, no, Bob isn't in this valid set. So other than that, you don't need to have any error checking. But you'd also probably check, your retry seconds. Okay, I've set retry seconds to 10 billion. Okay, well, you probably won't be alive for the next retry, so that's probably not a very sensible set. And you can have a validate range within here as well. So validate as much as you possibly can. If you don't, declare the declare the type. If you don't know what type something's going to be, if it's an int or a string, it's pretty straightforward. But if it's something perhaps more complex type, so for instance, if we've got a credential object, so if I do a $cred equals get dash credential, and again, whenever using get dash credential, even use a minus message, guy wants to know, so that you don't get some unnamed pop-up coming up with asking for your credentials. Someone think, oh, should I put credentials in there? We know all end users would, and yeah, they could be hacked easily, but you make sure that the message you put in relates to your script, so they know it's come from the script. So obviously this is just a window that can come up anywhere. So if I put in some parameters, I've got $cred, but what is $cred? Well, get. So what I can do is full name. Remember what we saw in the exception stuff. Or if I really want to be, I can pipe it through set clipboard, PowerShell 4 or thereabouts and above. So now I can go Control V, $cred. So that's now strongly typed. The more strongly typed stuff you do, the better it will be for you in the long run. A, for IntelliSense, but also, the common one I do is I'll later use an object and assign it to a string, and you think, why has this object lost all its properties? Because you've assigned it to what is a string variable, and therefore it'll effectively call its .toString method. But believe me, it's worth those occasional foo bars to strongly type thing. Again, that's just robustness, as we saw there in this bit here. Yeah, just with strict mode. Yeah. So that's why I would define thread with its type and a known value before I even started using it. PowerShell doesn't insist on that, but I do in my code. So we've seen how we get the type full name from the PS credential there. But also, and this isn't a word, deinitialization. But when I've finished with something, so let's say I've closed a file, for instance, I will then set its reference that I've been using to null, so that if I accidentally use it later on, I'm going to get an error. What do you mean by that? Well, typically, let's say if I was doing this in C code and I had a handle to an open file that I've been writing to and I closed it, and I then started writing to it again, not having opened it, I would get an error. Now that error might be obvious, goes, yeah, this file is closed, or no open handle or something. But if you actually set the reference to it because you know that object is no longer valid, then you know that if you come to use it and it's null, that you've unset it. You can even remove the variable with remove -variable. Yeah, I do that when if I'm allocating memory. Again, you don't normally have to allocate memory; it gets automatically done for you. But we saw some Twitter discussions today. I've been doing some platform invoke code where you actually have to allocate memory, or memory gets allocated for you, and you have to free it. So when I've freed that memory, I will set that particular variable to null to make sure that I don't try and access the memory again. Because if I freed it, somebody else owns it now. And I might either get random stuff back, or I might cause some sort of exception if that's then in somebody else's address space. So when you finish with something, either remove the variable completely or just set it to null. Some other stuff. How am I doing? I was looking at time. How are we doing? Yeah, probably about on track. Again, this is all about robustness. Yeah. Because this helps people understand the code and therefore unlikely to make, or hopefully less likely to make changes to the code thinking, oh yeah, I didn't take this into account. Whereas if your comment says, yeah, I tried doing it this way and it didn't work, so I've done it this way, then that's probably going to stop that person trying to do it that way. Or they might go, actually, yeah, I know why that failed. But then they might fix the code or change the code and then update the comment as well. Comments are only good if they're up to date. Let's use meaningful variable names. I found a piece of my code, it was only a couple of years old this week, which had $I in it, and I was very annoyed with myself. Why? Because I would call it $index if that was an index into something. Yeah. When I started writing code for my Commodore VIC-20 back in the 80s, when I had 3.5K, of RAM, you had to write very terse code. Now with huge amounts of memory and tab completion, there's no excuse for writing variable names. Make it as self-explanatory as you possibly can. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be index into table or index into this table. Yeah, that might be a little bit cumbersome, but just $index. $I, $J, $K, which I have been guilty of using in the past, really don't help. Never, ever, ever do that at the top level. That means there's any errors, they're just going to be thrown away. I have been working with someone who I won't mention, but he knows who he is, and he's learned and has learned. Again, it's the sort of person, and that's the sort of person I am. Is that if somebody's saying this, I'll explain. I won't just go laugh at them and go, "Oh, don't do that, that's crap. It's just awful. Go away." It's a case of no. This is why you shouldn't do it. This is a better way to do it. Hence, hopefully, why there's interest in this session today. Although Adam's not told me, actually, no one's turned up yet, which is great. But hey ho, I'll keep talking. So yeah, let's not ignore errors completely. Let's deal with them as necessary. As we've seen, sometimes I can do an error action silently continue, where I'm going to handle that error or ignore it because there's nothing I can do, or it doesn't really matter, in which case I've got a comment as to why I'm ignoring it, but never do the error action silently continue. I came across some code this week when I was testing a script for somebody, and it just wasn't working. No error, wasn't working. And then as I single step through the code, got to a point where it was importing a snap-in or module, can't remember which, and it just had minus EA0 on it, minus error action silently continue. So it's failing to import this module that it needed commandlets from, and there was an error action silently continue. I mean, why? If it was something that, as you can say, well, if I don't get this module, then I won't call these functions, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, maybe. But if it's, key to the module, that lost me at least an hour troubleshooting. Because if it had come up and said, yeah, I couldn't load the module and this was the error, which is what happened when I found that particular line in code and commented out or removed the error action silently continue, it actually told me exactly what the error was. Now, it might be a case of that didn't mean anything. In fact, to me at the time, it didn't mean anything. But what I could have done is had a look at the error, either try catch around it or used a minus error variable and just thrown up a generic, couldn't load this module. Because then I would have gone to the command line and gone, no, let me try and load this module manually. Oh, look, I get this error. Yeah, now let me go and look this up on the internet. So again, right back to the start of the conversation this evening, which is, does it make sense to show the error in its raw form? Can you tone it down a bit? Can you guide a person to what they need to do? A lot of my scripts, if it says, this import of this module wasn't successful, I might go and check, what's been installed module-wise, or if it's, come in from an install, let's say the Citrix component, is the Citrix component installed? And if I don't find that Citrix component installed, by quick checking the registry, I go, oh, it doesn't look like you've installed Citrix Studio, so you're not going to have these particular commandlets available. Or I might just have to put up an error saying, yeah, this module isn't available. Would you like me to go and install it for you? It might be available in the PowerShell gallery. Got to then think about the security scope of your script and who it's running as, and do you really want to start loading things, particularly if it's running privileged, as a domain admin or whatever, or do you just want to give them a pointer saying, no, couldn't load this module, but you can get it from this URL, or just run this command to get it, so they can literally copy and paste from the error message to install that module. So guiding people to how they rectify the problem, not making them run away screaming just because of some red text. Occasionally you have to make sure that you're testing for null or zero. They are subtly different, but if you use not, the shriek character or minus not, then actually both will they will behave very similar. So actually check what it is. So it might be a case of, are you checking whether a property exists? But if it exists, is it 0? If it's 0 as opposed to 1 because it's an integer, So check null might mean a property doesn't exist, whereas 0 might mean, yeah, it exists and it's 0, which is a perfectly valid value. So make sure you understand the subtle difference between null and 0. They are spelt differently for a reason. Something I see a lot of, particularly when you turn on the strict mode, the set strict mode, is if you're looking for a particular object, a particular property on an object which may or may not be there. So if you're getting the output of a directory listing, which is get child item, most of the properties are always going to be there. Some of them might be blank, or maybe empty, or null strings, or empty strings, or the property might not be there at all. So if there's a possibility the property isn't there, then you need to go and check that before you actually start using that property. Because if you go straight to using, guys in that second line there, guys object dot some property, and some property doesn't exist, if you've got strict mode on, then that will throw you an error. Some property does not exist. If you've not got strict mode on, that will just evaluate to null. So check a property exists if it's important. If you're just selecting it, it doesn't matter, because if you do a select object on a particular property, it doesn't exist, doesn't matter. But this is if you're explicitly referencing that particular property, or particularly if it's many properties deep. Sometimes you have to have an if not to say nested if, but if this exists and this exists and this exists. It's a bit mucky, but it can, it depends really whether you think those properties may or may not exist. I tend to assume they will until I see an error. Again, if you think get child item isn't going to return the length property, It's like, yeah, that's fundamental to how getChild works, getChildItem works with the file system provider, but that might not work with a different PowerShell provider. Yep. Again, just to make people be able to understand your codes, therefore make less or fewer changes unnecessarily. Say, well, yeah, are those parameters the right way around? Like I showed you with the copy item, yeah? So use minus path and minus destination. Yeah, logic says it probably would be source and destination, but you never know, particularly with positional parameters. So I never, ever use positional parameters when I write my own functions. Yeah, I don't want anything to be implicit. I'll always use named arguments. But what if you can't remember what the argument names are? Remember, you've got IntelliSense, yeah? Tab completion. It's all there. You know, it's designed to make this stuff easy. And don't have abbreviations. I was showing earlier. You could have a -I. What's a -I mean? Yeah. I sometimes get frustrated now where I go to a command line executable and try and tab complete the command line executables arguments. And why is it not tab completing? Oh yeah, because it's not PowerShell. Yeah. The more people can understand code just by reading it, the less likely they are to break it, I hope. So I've already said this earlier, param blocks, do as much checking you can there with various of the validate checks, such as validate set, to make sure your string is in a particular set. Check numeric ones are sensible, that sort of side of things. Aliases, yeah, aliases on the command line, yeah, great, because they save you time. So I do a lot of LS because I come from a Unix background. LS, short for list files. That'd be LF guy. Well, actually, LF used to be another alias on Unix, or PS from the Linux Unix world for getting processes. But if I do that in a script, I'm not going to do PS. I'm going to do get-process. Again, I can tab complete it. I can see what aliases I've got built in. There's a lot of built-in ones. So everything on the left-hand side there, don't use those in scripts. Notice mukdir isn't an alias, as I thought it was. Oh, and I put in there for tweets as well, because sometimes trying to fit a command line or PowerShell command line into a tweet is a bit of a pain. So I do have to use aliases and abbreviated properties, but I'll normally put a screenshot of the full thing in as well. Some more additional stuff as we draw to a close. Thank God, you say. Yeah, some pretty obvious things. So again, if you've got an array, let's say I've got, again, I'm going to strongly type it, array items. Why have I put $1 in there? Just to check that I'm paying attention, which I still am, equals, actually, let me show you one other thing. What I will always do, because what you'll find in PowerShell is that it can be quotes, clever quotes at times. That sometimes if it's returning one item, it will return a single item, not an array. If it's returning 2 or more, it will return an array. Your code may expect it to be a single item or may expect it to be an array. Whereas if I think there's any possibility of anything being an array, so there being more than one result back from whatever it is, I will always force it to an array, because even if you do that, but just do your, if I get child item, and what type is it? Oh, it has actually turned it array. There are instances, can't remember off the top of my head, but where it wouldn't have actually made it an array. So what I'll always do is, so if I was actually wanted to get some items in there anyway, is to force it to an array. So I have seen it before where you tell it explicitly it's an array, but it's returned one item and it's flattened the array. It's not actually an array. So I always make sure I'll wrap it in an at parentheses. So $items .count, how many items have I got in here? Kapunt, that well-known method, property, 135. So if I do 2034, Because I've got strict mode enabled, that tells me the index was outside of the bounds of the array. If it didn't have strict mode enabled, that would just come back as null. We said, well, the array is a variable length. How do I get the last item? Well, I get the last item by -1, yeah? 134, in fact, yeah? So the array size was 135, which is 0 to 134, yeah? So same item. I want to get the penultimate, -2. Get the first item, 0. So where you can either use relative indices, such as -1, -2, or just have your for int index, yeah. So strongly type, we don't have $I, $0 index minus less than $index dot count $index plus an increment, so that just +1, and I can iterate in this loop over all those items, unless I'm removing them, in which case you'd actually index backwards. So you'd start off at index count -1 and iterate to 0, except built-in array type doesn't allow you to do that. That's when you'd use a .NET array type, such as new object system.collections. Notice I'm tab completing now, so you don't have to remember any of these. List string. You have to give it a type, but most of the time, if it's not just a simple string, you can just call it PS object. That will have a proper array, because you'll find with arrays, built-in arrays, that they're actually of a fixed size, which is a bit of a shock when you first start using arrays in PowerShell. So be careful with arrays. Watch your array flattening. I spectacularly failed to demonstrate, but it does happen. We can check whether it's an array, or if we actually only want the first item and we know that we can ignore the other ones, I can select -object minus first or minus last to select specific ones. Oh, the slide deck will be made available as well as the recording, by the way. Oh, something else as well. If you've asked a user for some input, so one of the things you could do is, I've said about horrible write host, but you could say $f equals read hoist as prompt, enter a number, and that number I'm going to call Alan. Notice it hasn't errored. Why? Because I didn't strongly type it. Yeah. So if I'd strongly typed it, yeah, then that's better. But I didn't strongly type it. So if I'm getting user input, and again, we need to make sure we sanity check all user input. Enter a number. Alan again. Oop, caps lock's on. $FFF. Now, if I'd actually force that into an int, choice equals $Alan, $FFF even. Use meaningful and variable names, yeah. FFFF is not a great meaningful variable name, hence why I forgot what I'd called it. Yeah, but what I can do is what's called a kind of a soft cast. So I can say $FFFF minus as, and then give it a type in square brackets. What does that make it? That makes it 0. So you need to check that it's 0. So 0 wouldn't be a valid parameter. You can also int itself. If you want to try forcing it, you can also have a try parse, where you can say, here's the string. I think it takes another argument, if I remember rightly, which is probably a ref argument, isn't it? Yeah, it should be a ref argument. We'll not get into ref arguments, reference arguments. See, what it's saying there is it's an exception calling, but I could have that in a try catch. So there's various ways. Whereas if I just try doing that, I get a problem straight away. Yeah. So assume your user is going to give you crap. So sanity check it before you start using it. Yeah, always assume the worst. So yeah, the try-pars, useful for date times as well when you have date times in non-standard formats, and of course standard format date format for PowerShell is that wonky US one as well. So whenever I output the date, I always do a minus format, capital G, to do it in the locale. Something we saw a couple of times already, I think. Here's null or empty. So rather than saying is not string variable name, or is string variable name minus EQ $null, or minus string variable name equal open quote close quote, you can do it all with that one static member of the string class. And if you're writing a complex if this and this or this, to make sure you fully understand it, then put lots of parentheses around it. There's no harm in putting parentheses around it. Some things like PS Script Analyzer or Visual Studio Code might say, well, you've got more parentheses than you need, but it's a case of, hey, if I need them to understand it, make sure other people can understand it, so that you can go between matching brackets with things like control, curly brace, control, right curly brace, then use them. There's no hardship. Get rid of any ambiguity. Yep, speaks for itself, I hope. If you're copying and pasting the same chunk of code over and over, you should be using a function. Yeah, I've seen some scripts which were thousands of lines, and they could have been a tenth of that just by having a function with some parameters, and you just call it with the things which are subtly different. The more you copy and paste stuff, the more of a pain it is to maintain, because if you have to fix something in that pasted code, you've got to remember everywhere you pasted it and fix every instance of it. So use functions. Well, shall I put this in a function or not? Am I going to reuse it? I'm going to copy and paste that. What I'll do is I'll copy and paste it, but into a function. Give it some parameters. It takes a couple of minutes extra, and there you've got it. Testing isn't a dirty word. Testing is something you need to do. It's not a case of, right, I finished writing this code, you go and test it. Because again, that's down to what we said right at the start of this, all those many hours ago, which is reputation. Someone thinks, well, every time they pass me their scripted test, I throw it back at them because all the things break. So check the obvious stuff yourself. So I'm going to breeze through this because I'm pretty much running out of time, and a lot of it speaks for itself. Different PowerShell versions, different environments, or different operating systems, somewhere where you're running maybe as an admin or not admin. So I've got in my lab some Dell rack mount servers. In my garage, I've got everything from XP, Windows 7. I don't think I've got Windows 8, but I've got Windows 10. I've got 2008 R2 because I've got customers on that. 2012, 2019. Try and make sure your scripts don't need to be run as admins unless they have to. There is this hash requires, but there's nothing worse than having to elevate something when you don't need to. Yeah, this one. Always this one. Oh, the user wouldn't be stupid enough to do this, would they? Oh, yes, they would. Let's code around it. Yeah. What if they've specified a temporary directory as being system32, and you go and erase everything in the temporary directory before you start running your script to make sure there's no files left over from last time? Oh, goodbye system32. Oh, goodbye machine. Yeah. So sanity check. How could somebody take it accidentally or deliberately, maliciously? Test it with different users. I might have different AD properties, which might make it run differently. Yeah, and the what if. That's the way I write my code. What if someone's stupid enough to, or what if this breaks, or what if this has run out of space, or what if this network connection isn't there? Yeah. But you've got to decide whether it is worth the script that you're doing. If it, like I say, if it's to save somebody 5 minutes of time completing some form, and you spend 3 weeks making it totally bulletproof, and it would have saved them 5 minutes a month, it's not been an effective use of your time. But it might be that you've learned some stuff along the way, which is great. Depends if you've got a boss will let you do that, or like me, self-employed, I don't do that. I don't get paid. A few things to help you: set strict mode, which we've seen. PS Script Analyzer module out there will get a lot of particularly static stuff. Tell you that you've got a variable that you've set and not used, and you look at it and go, yeah, I don't need that, I'll get rid of it. Or, oh yeah, I didn't, oh yeah, I've typoed that, for instance. So that's one worth getting hold of. ISE steroids, if you still use PowerShell ISE, is a paid for add-on, but it's very good for, again, being able to do extra stuff for you. Pester, something I've not actually used, I have to confess, and I should do. It's an automated testing framework. Yes, I must look into that. Code review, either you look through your code, or even you talk it through with your dog or your cat or your goldfish or your hamster, because just trying to explain the code to somebody else, particularly if you have a problem, can very often help you solve that problem. But if you've got peers to code review it, or not Piers Morgan, but fellow people that can review it for you, then get them to do it. And as long as you reciprocate, I do that for some of the companies I work for. Get people to look at my code and vice versa. Again, not going to laugh at them and go, ha, that's crap. It's like, have you thought about doing this? Or what happens if this were to happen? Or that sort of stuff. And look at other people's code. But again, there is quite a lot of stuff out there which isn't great. So if you look at somebody else's bad code and think, oh yeah, I've heard of this person, this code's great, and it's not. So this again is all about reputation. So get some good code to look at. I think my code's okay. I'd look at the more recent stuff, because I look at stuff from a few years ago and it's like, I've got aliases in there and perhaps non-meaningful identifiers. But that shows I'm learning. So the whole PowerShell thing is a learning curve. I've learned some stuff this week, which is been trying to get my head around for 2 years. So a few references again. Say I've been recording. I'll put the slide deck out. Don't know how Adam wants to do that, but I can certainly push it out on Twitter afterwards. There's a lot of PowerShell out there, but if you're going to use it, particularly if you're going to, if someone's written a script and you think, well, that does what I want it to do, get hold of that script. Make sure it does actually do what you want it to do, and it's not malware sort of accidentally or deliberately. So you run it on your domain as a domain admin to go and fix something, and you find it deletes 1,000 Active Directory accounts. It's like, I didn't really quite code review it properly first, or I didn't test it in my test environment. So don't just assume all code out there. GitGub, that well-known website. Don't assume all code out there is going to do what it says it does. Particularly if you're going to be running it in a live production environment. And there we go. That was almost 2 hours bang on, and even with an internet interruption, and my internet still seems to be down, it would seem. But thank you, 4G, for saving me.
Yeah, no, that's well prepared. I have always thought about going 4G, but the latency kills me here. No, that's well prepared.
Thank you. Did we have any questions? I did notice the chat, but I haven't actually been looking at chat, so it's probably 1,000 questions. Guy, what are you on about? Gone.
So
that's 2 hours ago.
Good discussions, actually. There was some good tips on how to find a script line number from Jonathan. Some nice messages of encouragement. And generally, I found the whole presentation to be really insightful, because not even just great discussion about exception handling and writing robust code, but a whole host of decent nuggets in there. Just general day-to-day PowerShell living. Almost really, really helpful, really, really useful stuff.
Great. Well, I hope it has been useful for people. It's just a case of taking this stuff on board and just doing it without even thinking. So it becomes second nature.
So if people did have questions afterwards, Guy, how do they reach you? What's you show us your Twitter?
Probably easiest on Twitter, although I'm on the world of EUC and the PowerShell Slack channels. I haven't got the YouTube open, so whether you can put my Twitter handle in there. It's in the presentation as well.
I've just put Guy's Twitter handle in the chat. If you have any questions for him after, or even when you catch the recording, if you're watching the recording, ping him on Twitter and shoot him a DM. I'm sure that'd be fine, right, Guy?
Absolutely, yeah. Can't guarantee any response times because I have a day job, unfortunately. But I try and help people as much as I possibly can. A lot of people have helped me throughout my career, so I want to give back. That's the whole point of the community, after all.
Well, exactly. That's what this is all about. You know, there's so many people, including this session as a nice example, but there's so many people that have helped me, and this is one of the many ways to return that. So no, that was really good. Thank you so much. That was great.
You.
Thank you, Guy. So just quickly before we sign off, just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Yeah, we've mentioned a couple of times, from tomorrow you'll be able to catch the recording on our YouTube channel. If anybody is interested in speaking, get in touch. On PS Southampton is a Twitter handle. Get in touch. We really want to get some more content going. Like Kai just said, this is all about helping the community, producing material that helps everyone. If you haven't already, join the meetup group. Let me just change scene here. Join the meetup group if you go to pssouth.co.uk. It's the meetup group. I'm sure that's how a lot of you signed up already, but maybe you didn't. Join the session now via that means. But there's actually no session scheduled next. So if you're thinking about it and you want to give back to the community, this is your chance. And there's no greater time than now in terms of flexibility. You can do it whenever's good for you and whatever topic you had in mind. But Guy, that was great. Thank you so much. Everyone else, thank you so much.
Thank you.